This is Munther Isaac, a Palestinian pastor in the city of Bethlehem, in the occupied West Bank. Isaac is one of around 50,000 Palestinian Christians living under occupation here. He leads an Evangelical Lutheran congregation. His ministry is part of a rich Palestinian Christian heritage that dates back to the time of Jesus. Bethlehem is where the Gospels say Christ was born. But with popular Western narratives about Palestine and Israel often framed as a battle between Muslims and Jews, its Christian minority is often overlooked, perhaps deliberately. Palestinian church leaders like Isaac, who speaks out against Israel's war in Gaza and its occupation of the Palestinian territories, sometimes find themselves at odds with their counterparts in the West, who have to reassess everything they've been taught about the Middle East. On this episode of the InnerView, I'll talk to Reverend Munther Isaac, the Palestinian Christian leader, on a mission to set the record straight on occupation, the war, and how these religious stereotypes perpetuate injustice. And Reverend Munther Isaac joins us now. Good to have you on the program, sir. It's been a tumultuous year for many people. Tell me what it's been like in Bethlehem for you and your congregation.
Well, first, thank you for having me. And to be sure, it has been a very, very difficult year for us, even here in Bethlehem. Of course, it's nothing in comparison to what's happening in Gaza. Nevertheless, it's been troubling for us. More hardships, more restrictions, sadly more unemployment, and more anxiety, whether it's from the abnormal activities of the settlers or of the fact that this war could escalate at any moment. We're watching what's happening in Gaza and thinking, are we next? So it's been really a very difficult year trying to keep people calm, trying even to keep the faith. We've been praying throughout this year, Lord, stop this war. And it's been challenging to pray over and over the same thing and yet feel there is no result, no stopping of this madness and of this killing. On all levels, it's been a very difficult year, but by God's grace, we have survived.
Tell me, what makes you ask, are we next?
Several things, to be honest. First, it's the declared intentions of the Israeli politicians. It's not as if they're hiding their intentions to annex the West Bank, and this could turn into violence. And second, the settlers seem to know that they are above the law. They are never held accountable. If they want to take any hill, any piece of land, they just do it. Even if they want to attack Palestinian villagers or farmers, uproot trees, or attack people in their homes, which happened throughout the last year, we know they will never be held accountable. And I think even beyond that, Israeli politicians, the Zionist leaders, I'm sure now they think we have destroyed Gaza entirely. We've killed more than 40,000, including 16,000 children. The displacement of close to 2 million, and no one held them accountable. No, it's the opposite. Netanyahu still goes to the United Nations and to the Congress, and it's not that he is treated normally. Even in the Congress, he's welcomed there. So I think Israeli politicians know that the international law doesn't apply on them, and even if everything says, you can go and annex the West Bank, they will still do it. And my fear is that it will turn into violence. They will still do it because they're never held accountable.
You said Netanyahu was welcomed in the U.S. Congress. You traveled to the U.S. You are not the stereotype of how a lot of people would perceive Palestinians, especially those who support Israel at all costs, no matter what. Tell me about that trip. Tell me about some of the challenges you faced when you traveled to the U.S. and what your message was.
Well, as a Christian leader, I've always felt that I must use my platform to elevate the voices of Palestinians, knowing that many people would listen to a pastor from Bethlehem more than they would listen to, say, a Palestinian politician. And actually, to begin with, many people are surprised to know that Palestinian Christians exist. And over the years, Israel and its allies managed to portray the conflict as a religious conflict. And so our mere presence and the fact that we're speaking up challenges that narrative and that stereotyping of Palestinians. So over the years, but more so since the war on Gaza, I've been traveling with many of my colleagues, trying to speak to church leaders, but also in some occasions to politicians, to policymakers in DC and in other places about the reality on the ground. And it's been a combination of frustration, anger, but also hope, to be honest. I say frustration and anger because many times we meet politicians who are very ignorant about the reality on the ground, yet still hold very strong positions. Other times we meet politicians who actually know the very small details of things on the ground, yet still support Israel because they're open, Israel is our ally. And so they tell us our politics is not based on justice and fairness. It's based on what's best for the interest of the United States. And I say hope because I've seen change in many politicians and certainly among many churches and church leaders. We've seen change. We've seen churches openly and with very strong language speak against this war because it's against our humanity, this much killing. And so we've seen some change. Even when Netanyahu visited the Congress, many congressmen and women did not attend. So clearly, we're beginning to see some shift in position, not enough to stop this war or even to move any peace process forward, but we will continue to go nevertheless.
I'm no expert on the denominations of Protestant Christianity, but when we hear evangelical, we generally associate it with a movement, particularly in the United States, which has a firm belief, religiously and politically, whether out of a deep conviction or just even tactically because of the eschatology of the end of times, to support Israel no matter what. It seems to be built in. So as a fellow evangelical, tell me about some of the conversations with other evangelicals, especially in the US.
Well, it's hard, to be honest. And sadly, you're right. There are many whom we call Christian Zionists who blindly support Israel, many times without really having a clear grip or understanding of the reality on the ground. They do it because they assume this is what the Bible teaches. So we try to challenge them on multiple levels. First, we try to help them see the results of their theology and ask the question, so you believe God gave the land to the Jewish people, but what about Palestinians? Are we supposed to leave? Are we supposed to accept as second-class citizens because the land is not empty? So we try to push a conversation, and sometimes we say, what about Palestinian Christians? I mean, we live in this land. We've been in this land for 2,000 years. Where do we fit in this kind of theology? We also try to read the Bible and say, does the Bible really teach the idea or the concept of a tribal, and let's be very clear, racist God who treats with nations based on their nationality, ethnicity, religion, who privileges one people group over the other, or who allocates pieces of land to certain groups of people. To me, this theology is actually antithetical to what we read in the Bible. This is not the God of justice, truth, and mercy, and this is definitely not the teachings of Jesus. So we try to challenge them on the basis of, does the Bible really teach this? And many times I go as far as saying, are you listening to yourselves? Because you're basically telling Palestinians and the world, you're imposing a certain religious belief about not just God, but what God wants to do in this land. And somehow all Palestinians are supposed to accept this. What about justice? What about human rights? Isn't this more important than anything? And the irony to me in all of this is that if there is one thing that should mark the Christian teaching, according to Jesus, it's love to God and love to neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do to others what you want others do to you. Love is the essence of all Christian values. And sadly, it's precisely what's missing. Love and justice are what's missing from the teachings and theologies of those Christian Zionists. And of course, many times, all of this is translated not just into beliefs, but into political activism on behalf of Israel. We've seen it during the Trump era. We still see it today. Many in the right wing support Israel politically, financially, and we're calling them out, to be honest. We're saying now that there is a genocide happening in the land, by not speaking out or by supporting and endorsing that genocide or by declaring it a war of self-defense, you're complicit in all of this. So we moved beyond just let's have a conversation into calling them out for being complicit in years of oppression against the Palestinians and right now in the genocide that is taking place in Gaza.
To build on that a little bit, there seems to be this association that Israel is fighting a civilizational war, and that Israel is on the side of Western civilization and everybody else is on the side of something else. And especially with Christianity, even though its roots are from where you are and where you come from, there's the association with Western values, Western civilization. Maybe it happened from the day that Emperor Constantine saw the cross in the sky and the Roman Empire adopted it. There is that association. How do you deconstruct that to have real conversations when people are so deeply embedded and entrenched in this binary thinking?
Well, we have to speak very clearly and call things by their name. And you're spot on, because I think the values you're talking about are definitely not Christian. They are colonial values. Israel is a settler colonial entity. I mean, it's not controversial, but somehow it's missed. People don't talk about it enough. The fact that this is not a religious war in that as if Jews and Muslims lived in one piece of land for generations and they can't coexist. We need to tackle the root causes of issues. Everything began when the land was described as a land without people. This is a very colonial mentality. And then with the Zionists coming to Palestine to establish a national homeland for the Jewish people on someone else's land. This is the problem. So we need to go back to the root causes, and we need to continue to call out things by their name. And especially when the Bible is used, we need to challenge the use of the Bible in such a way and bring it back to the true essence of what Christian values are all about. Let's be clear, because I think it serves Israel and its allies, especially in the United States, when they want to continue to justify their support to their people, why we are supporting Israel. Well, they create this narrative that this is a war between the axis of good and axis of evil, between what they call the Judeo-Christian traditions and then Arabs and Muslims. It's a very supremacist ideology, and I don't hesitate calling it for what it is, even as a Christian, because again, I don't think this represents Christian values. Christian values begin with thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the Christian tradition, and we find it in both, scriptures, old and new. So I wish they highlight that rather than the ideologies and practices of taking someone else's land by force, ethnically cleansing, pushing people out, dehumanizing them to the extent that they justify the killing of Palestinians in such big numbers.
Religion as a whole has been used cynically and instrumentally by Jews, Christians, Muslims. Does it only get worse the more oppression that we see? Do we lose the middle ground more and more the longer the oppression, occupation, dehumanization continues?
Certainly, and let's be clear, and I think you mentioned something important. We also lose more when we make it a religious conflict. This is not a Christian cause or a Muslim cause, a religious cause. We must be clear about this. And whenever we make it about a certain religious ideology or religious belief, that's when everyone loses, because who wins when we make it a war between two gods? If you're telling me God gave the land, or if you're telling me my God gave me this land, or I am entitled because of my religious belief, or I am, we can't even have a logical conversation. At the same time, I'm not saying we should get religion out of the picture, because to me, it's a moral, ethical cause. And again, let me speak from my own Christian tradition. You can't claim to love God if you don't love your neighbor. It's as simple as that. You can't claim to be worshiping God and then not be concerned about injustice. And certainly, the longer this goes on, the lack of trust people will have, not just in politicians, but in religious leaders, because we're supposed to be the voices for peace, justice, equality. We're supposed to make our world a better place. And that's why I will continue not just to call out faith leaders, but to work with many faith leaders. And as I said, we've seen a lot of changes in churches today. There has always been Christians who supported justice in Palestine. And today we're seeing, and this is something I've witnessed in my last visit to the United States, new alliances of Jews and Muslims coming together and saying, we need to work together for justice, to end apartheid in Palestine, to end this genocide. I think this is when our voices as people of faith and leaders of faith become more credible, not when we support war or violence.
I asked you about your trip to the United States. You had another trip to South Africa. You spoke at a church, you spoke at a mosque. Tell me about that trip, particularly with South Africa's role in taking Israel to the ICJ in mind. Talk to me about that trip to South Africa.
Well, that was definitely a memorable and emotional trip. First and foremost, I wanted to say thank you for South Africa as people, as government, and also as church leaders, because the church in South Africa and many church leaders have stood with us from the very beginning, even before this war. And they have been a very strong supporter to our cause, and we've always been in touch. And I have many church leaders there that I don't hesitate to call as mentors, especially those who were involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. So part of it was to go and say thank you, but also to learn and to take counsel and to think together. How can we unite as faith leaders to end apartheid in Palestine the same way you created grassroots movements in South Africa some years ago to end apartheid in South Africa? And part of that was creating also global alliances. And again, the South African church and leaders there are also very instrumental in that right now, in trying to help us and many others mobilize global grassroots initiatives to creatively and jointly put pressure on Israel to end its apartheid policies. The whole world united many years ago in the 80s to say we can't live in a world in which there is so much blatant discrimination against a certain group of people by the powerful and the dominant. And I think the South Africans realized that even though it ended in South Africa and didn't end in other places, and certainly not in Palestine, whenever they visit us here, they tell us, one church leader told me, Munther, I can spell apartheid from distance. What you have is far worse than apartheid. So we go there, we went there as a group to say thank you, to learn, but also to meet and take advice. And the interfaith work there is inspiring, whether during the anti-apartheid struggle or even now. I met some Jewish activists. I spoke with many Muslim activists. I was, invited to address a group of Muslims in a mosque. It was a memorable experience. And this is the kind of collaboration that can really make our world a better place. At the end of the day, I am a Christian, they are Muslims. We will disagree on many things for sure, foundational things at our beliefs. But if we can't agree that we need to work together to end discrimination in our context, then I don't think anybody will take us seriously whenever we proclaim our own unique religious beliefs, whether I do it as a Christian or they do it as Muslim leaders or Jews or people of any other faith.
With all the murder, with all the destruction, with all these unimaginable crimes that have occurred, all this mass murder, have you found your own faith challenged?
Of course, I will lie if I say that I haven't. I would say in times of distress, our faith is tested. And we all search for God, especially, as I said, when you pray so hard for something for so long, and it seems that God is not listening. Yet, faith is the one thing maybe that no one can take away from us, because it's here. You know, the armies of the world, as I preach in Christmas, cannot take this belief in the presence of God with us in times of distress. No one can take this from us. And in this war, to me personally and to my community, we found God as one who suffers with us. Hence the idea of Christ in the rubble, which is, to some, was a controversial statement. When I said in Christmas, if Christ were to be born today, he would be born under the rubble in Gaza as a sign of solidarity, because this is how we felt comfort. And interestingly, you know, it's a common thread when people go through difficult times. Many times they come out of it saying, we felt the comforting presence of God with us. And this is where, you know, I think I found comfort, and this is what I will continue to preach, the idea of the God who is in solidarity with us in the midst of our oppression, not just in words, but really you have this, you want to call it supernatural experience of experiencing God calming you, giving you comfort and peace, even in the midst of the most difficult times. Of course, we will continue to pray that the war ends soon. We will continue to pray, as we do every time we meet now, for prayer. Lord, may this evil war end today. It's unbearable to the people who live it. Yet at the same time, I will also pray that anybody going through difficult times, especially now our siblings in Gaza, will also experience the comforting presence of God with them in times of distress.
What is your message to those who don't make the association with Christ at the checkpoint or Christ under the rubble, as you say? For those who have a connection to Christ as some sort of domineering, political, powerful leader taking sides in the conflict, your message to those fellow Christians is what?
Well, read the Gospels. Read the teachings of Jesus. Study the life of Jesus. See where he spent most of his time, with whom he spent most of his time, the things he taught. You know, Jesus was very clear. Blessed are those who are mourning, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are those who thirst for righteousness, for justice, for they shall be satisfied. Jesus was clear that his message is good news to the poor, liberation to those in prison, to those who are marginalized, oppressed, the poor, the hungry. And one of the teachings of Jesus that I kept repeating over and over throughout the last year is a story Jesus told about Judgment Day, you know. And usually when in religious traditions you talk about Judgment Day, I think people want to listen, you know, how do I make sure I'm on the right side in judgment when Judgment Day comes. And Jesus was very clear. He says, one group of people, you come to me, to the other group, I don't want anything associated with you. And one group who says, okay, what have we done right? And he says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me water. I was naked and you clothed me. I was a stranger, you gave me home. I was a prisoner and you visited me. And they ask him, when have we done this, Jesus? And he says, whatever you have done to the least of these, you have done to me. And to the other side, who says, I don't want anything with you, they ask him, what have we done? And he said, I was hungry and you did not feed me, and so on. And the message is clear, this is Jesus telling us that we will be judged based not just on how we treated the marginalized victims of oppression, those victims, as I see this passage, of unjust structures, those are hungry, thirsty, and so on, but whether we have even seen the image of Jesus in every oppressed person, everyone suffering, whether naked, hungry, stranger, even prisoner. This is the teaching of Jesus. So I would say, I hope you read about not just, his life, his teaching, the meekness he embodied. He was the embodiment of compassion, mercy, and truth. And I wish people really rediscover this element of Jesus rather than politicizing it. And sadly, many times, we are troubled when even Christian leaders seem to get away from the ethics of Jesus when it comes to the public discourse, but only making it something of the individual manner. They would say, this is how you treat your neighbor. I say, no, Jesus lived and taught in politically charged environment. He was born under occupation. The Roman Empire defined that reality. And so everything he said was very much calculated and addressed in such a context in which there was so much hatred and resentment of the other and so on. And Jesus came to present a different model. And I will continue to promote that.
Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I thank you very much for joining us on the InnerView.
Again, thank you for having me.
Take care.